The Reserve Bank today raised interest rates for the sixth time in 6 months, but this time by half what was expected, 0.25 basis points. So we've got now the highest official interest rates in 9 years. And it means that if you've got a mortgage of $750,000, that's about average, you're now paying each month an extra $1,100. And that's a really big hit. So it's no wonder there are already signs that the economy is slowing. House prices are about to fall a lot. Well, today, Treasurer Jim Chalmers was once again talking doom and gloom and cuts ahead of his budget in 3 weeks' time.
The three most important pieces of context for the budget that we are currently finalising is, first of all, high and rising inflation, rising interest rates and falling real wages. Secondly, deteriorating global outlook. And thirdly, persistent structural pressures on the Australian budget in areas like health and NDIS and aged care and defence, and the rising costs of servicing Commonwealth debt.
Joining me is Sky News Business Editor Ross Greenwood. Ross, has the Reserve Bank got it right?
Look, it's finally judged because they can get it right or wrong in two ways. They can either go too hard by raising interest rates and push Australia's economy into a recession. And I've often said it's not the first or the second or the third interest rate rise that counts. It's actually the last two, because they're the ones that do most of the damage generally. Go back to the 1990s, that's what happened there. Or the other problem that they could have is that they don't go hard enough. If they don't go hard enough, Australia ends up with lasting inflation. If that happens, then you'll end up having higher unemployment than what is desirable for Australia. You'll have a lack of investment in this country, and in real terms, the country will go backwards. So they call it a narrow path, and it is certainly a narrow path. For now, tapering and waiting to see the effect, the cumulative effect of these rate rises so far, I think is probably worthwhile. But, do understand from their statement today, they are convinced that they need to raise interest rates even higher than what they are right now.
Well, that's going to cause even more pain, as if it hasn't been causing enough already. For all this pain, what's the gain? Are there actually signs that these rate rises are working, that inflation is being tamed?
Yes, and there's not much evidence of that so far because, say, for example, the one thing that causes inflation is retail sales, people going out and continuing to spend. Well, right now, because people have got jobs, their ability to absorb price rises is very strong. They also have savings left over from the COVID pandemic and the payments that were made by the previous government. And so that gives them a buffer. It's when that runs out, which is probably later this year, we start to see the real impact of these rate rises. And give you a small example of this. If you've got a $750,000 mortgage, which in a capital city these days is pretty much the average, and you're on the average salary of $90,000 a year, that rate rise as a cumulative effect is around $12,000 per year already. Now, if you consider that that's a big wedge after tax of your pay, that's got to have a big impact on your standard of living at some stage. And so it's when those savings run out, or if people lose jobs, that's where really the hurt starts to come as a result of the Reserve Bank's actions.
Look, I think that the point you made, that a lot of this is going to be felt down the track, particularly when, fixed rate mortgages come off and all that, people are getting off those. I think it's going to hurt a lot of people more than they suspected, and there'll be delayed reaction. So, the Reserve Bank has got to be seeing into the future in quite a way to make sure it gets it right. Now, the Treasurer today gave a very big hint, Ross, that the better off Australians are not going to get the third and last stage of all the tax cuts that Labor agreed to in 2018. They were passed. We're still going to get, not seeing them for another couple of years, of course, the stage 3 ones. So a lot of it's going to be eaten up in bracket creep, of course. Now, the Treasurer said, well, about those stage 3 tax cuts, a lot of journalists are saying you shouldn't do them, you shouldn't have them. He said, well, yes, actually, look what's happened in Britain. Now, as I said last night, the British government promised tax cuts for the rich in its own budget a week and a half ago. The pound promptly collapsed and the government yesterday scrapped that cut. Here's Chalmers today.
that I do see what's happening in the UK as a cautionary tale of getting that fiscal and monetary balance out of whack.
So what is Labor really going to do with these promised stage 3 tax cuts?
Well, I do notice that those agitating aggressively for these tax cuts, which have been legislated by both sides of Parliament, are very much about The Guardian, the Australian Institute, the ABC, right, who are wanting some sort of more social justice, more for the less well off, despite the fact that these tax cuts, the stage 3 tax cuts, were the true tax reform to make Australia's tax system much easier, to flatten out the tax scale, to make it really a greater incentive to work. And remember that most Australians right now have a job. So this is why, yes, you've got to be careful not to be trying to stimulate the economy at the same time that the Reserve Bank is trying to cool the economy. But those tax cuts don't come in for 2 years. So you've got plenty of time to sit and wait and watch and see what happens. So my feeling is this is not like the UK. This has been planned. This has been understood. The ratings agencies have already signed off and ticked off on it, unlike the UK tax cuts that came in at a time when, again, they've got an inflation problem. So as I say, I'd suggest that really the government right now has time to wait and remember that they went to the election promising those stage 3 tax cuts to Australians.
It would be no more than, by the time they finally arrive, returning to the people who pay most of the tax in this country, some of the bracket creep that they've had in the 6 years that it would have taken for the tax cuts to get there. It's quite extraordinary. Ross Greenwood, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Quite okay.